Welcome, everyone. This is our introduction episode to our brand new podcast. The name of our podcast, and get ready for this, the Deconstructors Club. Deconstructors Club. Isn't that amazing? Well, I don't know. Hopefully, by the end of this episode, you're going to say, that is an amazing name, because I think it's an amazing name. And we're going to explain why we named this brand new podcast Deconstructors Club. So we're not going to go into too much detail of who we are. We're going to talk about a little bit about why we named the podcast what we named it. And then in another episode, we'll talk a little bit more about ourselves. And why I'm using the plural our is because my co-host, good friend, featured guest, I don't know what other titles we can put.
That's enough.
Bob Azarito is here, and we're going to be together. We're going to be with you. This is going to be a journey because we have a lot of topics that we want to talk about, a lot of cool stuff. But the very first thing we want to talk about is why this name, the Deconstructors Club, and why use deconstructor and what's deconstruction? I'm sure. There's a lot of people already using this word, and this word it's still new, but it's now becoming so much more popular, especially within the religious context, the Christian context. And, a lot of people have been deconstructing from evangelicalism. I don't want to get into too much of my definition. It's your definition. So go ahead and talk to us about that with you, Bob Azarito.
Yeah. So, and you are, of course, Alex Weiss.
Yes. And I didn't introduce myself, did I?
That's okay. It's all right.
Alex Weiss. That's me.
Right. And Alex and I have shared similar stories, right? Similar backgrounds, events, and things that we were surprised of how much we sort of related to each other's stories. So we settled on this Deconstructors Club because it is something that we experienced in a very dramatic way at a certain point in our lives, and in some ways continue to experience the effects of and the process of deconstruction and reconstruction. Mm-hmm. What is this about? This is about the way sometimes we can begin to question aspects of our faith. And sometimes when we can begin to feel as if our security, our sense of meaning and purpose and reality is kind of coming undone in some fashion or in some way. Mm-hmm. And at first it's very bewildering and very difficult, and it feels very alone. Mm-hmm. And so one of the reasons...
So you became a part of the club not knowing you were a part of the club.
No, I had no idea there was a club. I just knew...
And it is unofficial, but we're probably just creating it right now, right?
Exactly. I thought I was the only one. I thought that's part of the problem, is that when this starts happening, especially within evangelicalism, you begin by feeling very alone, because a big part of evangelicalism is showing up as correct, showing up as believing, showing up as having confidence and assurance. But there's very little talk about questioning or doubting or wondering. In fact,
which we all do anyway, but we were made to think that was bad.
Yeah, you weren't allowed to really do that, especially not in the open. And in fact, if you did come to someone, which I did occasionally, come to a leader and talk about my own doubts, it was viewed as a problem. And I became a problem because I had some questions and some doubts, because doubting wasn't valued. It wasn't viewed as some sort of process, and that was beneficial. It was viewed as sinful, as mistake, as something that you had to be kind of concerned about, like you were beginning to move outside of the group if you started to feel some doubts or questions. And so one of the things I'd like...
And you were kind of pushed out.
Oh,
you were,
yeah.
I remember youth club years ago, we had a guy that was bold enough to be asking the right questions, but it looked like something wrong.
Right.
But yet we knew all of us wanted to ask those questions, but he did.
Right.
And instead we're like, why are you asking those questions? So it's like shutting them down, pushing them away.
Right. It was not respected. It wasn't viewed as part of learning. It wasn't viewed as part of growing. It was viewed as something wrong with you because all of a sudden it looked as if your faith was being questioned and faith was being questioned and God was being questioned. None of those things were acceptable in my evangelical upbringing. So the reason I liked Deconstructors Club.
We gotta get used to the name.
I'll get it in time. The reason I like Deconstructors Club really is the club part. Because for so long, I felt so alone in these questions, so isolated, so dismissed, so sidelined that I want to be a place where people who may be experiencing this can feel like they're not alone, that they have a place they can belong.
Right.
And I think,
and it's okay to question.
and it's totally okay. Yeah. And that you're going to be this is going to be about experiencing acceptance in that period of deconstruction, not to be afraid of it, not to feel shamed by it.
Right.
And that's
what
you're
being deceived by the devil.
Yeah, right. You need
You're
to be
being attacked to question your faith and doubt.
Right. And we need to call a meeting to pray over you and cast out those demons of doubt, right? So this kind of a thing is what we're trying to avoid for people who might be tuning in or listening to us over the many weeks, hopefully, that we're doing this.
Right.
We want them to feel like there's a place. And fortunately, there are more places today than there were 35 years ago when this was kind of happening in my life.
Right. There's a lot of social media platforms right now that are for deconstructors. And I'm really happy about that. Because people have found community within those platforms. And we're adding on to that. We're another one of those platforms. But we want people to understand, too, that our conversations, although they will be geared toward a lot of deconstructing issues that are happening, why we're deconstructing. But on top of that, we're going to have a lot of guests, a lot of people that are going to be coming in. And it's going to be pretty cool to be talking to different people and with different perspectives, different views. We're not just talking about this is going to be, a podcast show that is only going to be attacking, evangelicalism or attacking fundamentalism. No. On the contrary, I like the word you said, deconstruct to reconstruct. And I think that's one of the things we get caught up too much in. A lot of these platforms, I like them. They're very beneficial, but sometimes it's only about the deconstruction part. A lot of us, the question about being a part of this club is, where do we go from now or from here? Where do we go from here? How do I reconstruct my faith? How do I reconstruct a belief system? Because we come from that, you have to be certain, but yet really it's not even about that because, well, I don't want to go into too much in that. That's for another episode, but we're not even certain with a lot of things about the Bible. There's so many questions about that too.
Exactly. And the other real part of that is that this process takes time. It doesn't happen overnight.
It's great.
You don't deconstruct one day and reconstruct the next.
Right.
Deconstruction can take a long time because at first you don't feel you have permission to do it. And so it's happening even though you're not paying attention to it, or you don't want to pay attention to it, or you're fearful about paying attention to it.
And it's scary because like when you've been taught about heaven and hell, and okay, you're deconstructing a lot of this. Oh, what if there really is a hell? Or what if there, so all of these things tend to haunt people when they're in this deconstruction period. So it's good to be in these types of clubs, communities that will really affirm it's okay.
Yeah, and because also in evangelicalism, there's this notion that God is a punishing God. And if you step out of line or make a wrong choice or think a wrong thing, God is not pleased. God is angry. God will react and punish you in your life because, and I don't think that's only in evangelicalism. I think that tends to be a somewhat common religious sort of way of thinking that the religion is some kind of rabbit's foot superstition, where if I do what I'm supposed to do, then God will reward me with making things work out for me in my life. And so evangelicalism had a lot of that superstition within it, or does have a lot of that superstition
within it. Good word
it.
to put.
And so we have to be aware of the fact that a lot of times it takes time. It takes time to go. First, it takes time to deconstruct, because you don't even know what you're deconstructing for a long time. You just know how you feel. You feel like you don't fit, or there's something amiss, or you have some questions and you don't even know how to articulate them at first. And then over time, you begin to become more precise about what you don't think, or what you wonder about, or what you're questioning. And then after a period of time, you begin to meet people, or have these, you're willing to have these conversations. You begin to pick up little aspects of maybe another way of thinking, that there is another way of thinking. Even that is a sort of a surprise. You mean you think that way?
One of the scariest parts too, now that you're saying this, because there are people, but sometimes we don't feel like there are, or if there are people like this, where are they? Because I need them in my life. Because a lot of times, especially coming from Christian evangelical families, that you start to doubt and you start to ask questions and you start to you start to deconstruct, and the families start to, make you feel bad, like, because you're not on the right path, you're being deceived. And not only just the family, there's a narrative that's being created by the evangelical church for people that are deconstructing. And the narrative is, you're just deconstructing because you want to sin. You want to live a licentious life. You want to do whatever you want. You don't want to be
You don't like the rules.
Yeah. You don't want to be obedient and submit to God's commands. And so, and that's far from the truth. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, there's no respect for actual intellectual struggles. There's no respect for the fact that...
So, Bob, did you deconstruct because you wanted to live a licentious life and just... sin?
I was tempted to live licentiously within evangelicalism, so I didn't need to deconstruct in order to have those temptations.
And the honest to goodness truth is that every single evangelical Christian wants to do that.
You're human. Of course, you're going to be tempted to do things that aren't good for you. That's part of being a human, part of growing up, to learn how to make good choices with your life. But no, deconstruction is an intellectual process, and I want to say a spiritual process, and an emotional process.
I was going to say that too, emotional, because it's painful.
It is painful.
You're not deconstructing because, I just want to go live a life on my. You're thinking, this is scary,
and it takes courage.
A lot of courage.
It takes courage to do it, especially when it's happening and you have no one around you to give you strength and support. That is so hard. And there may be a lot of people in evangelicalism still. They'll probably never find our podcast, but they're in evangelicalism and they're thinking this way, and they're thinking they're the only ones who think this way. And a lot of times evangelicals, when they finally, and a lot of my friends this happened to, they finally end up having the bravery to acknowledge this process, these doubts, these questions, they left for good. They left the church for good. They left spirituality for good. They left God for good. And I think back and wonder what could have happened had there been a place for this process. And to know there are a lot of different ways to think, and a lot of different
because people become cynical toward Christianity, toward the Bible,
they've
toward
been hurt.
Jesus.
They feel branded. They feel
and you hit something really good, because people deconstruct definitely out of intellectual reasons, but then there's people that deconstruct out of emotional pain. Because they've been spiritually abused. There's so many people within the evangelical church that have been spiritually abused. They've been gaslit, they've been discredited, or beyond that, there's been more than just spiritual abuse. There are people that have been, I've known people personally that have been sexually abused, and other types of abuses have happened, manipulation, a lot of stuff. And so people are leaving, Christianity altogether. And so they're deconstructing, but they're like, I don't have any depth or room for faith.
Right.
And I do believe that there is faith that we can reclaim.
Yeah.
But the reclaiming is the hard part.
It is, and you have to be willing. It takes some time to go through the process. And at some, I get. My thought is the pathway from deconstruction to reconstruction has to pass through the valley of rejection.
Wow.
I mean,
that's true.
It's
that's true.
You have to. It's a tough valley because it feels like you no longer believe anything.
Right.
And that's a tough place.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very lonely place because you don't know what's on the other side yet, but you just know you couldn't stay there any longer.
I think there's a lot of people that, and I'm hoping that they're listening to this episode and this podcast, even viewing, we'll be streaming this or uploading it to YouTube, that feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
They feel a deep rejection, and they feel that, and it's hard because now where do I belong?
There's no room for me.
Yeah.
No room for me.
Where do I go? Who do I talk to? Where do I belong?
Yeah.
There are definitely therapy and other things that are very helpful during that time, and recommended. Mm-hmm. But I do believe too that you got to begin to explore and open up to relationships that don't have the perspective that you once had. Mm-hmm. And I like what you said. You have to leave it because it's the toxicity of that system that is keeping your mind oppressed, your emotions, or in a setting where, you're in an abusive setting. And it's not that easy to come out of it, but you have to figure out how to get out of it. And in that process, there's that deconstruction process. Like you said, there's sadness, there's depression, there's a lot of difficulties that people go through. So this isn't a thing of it's like somebody said, it's a sexy thing now that people want to deconstruct, or it's a fad, or it's no, it's serious.
Well, and it's no matter when it happens for you, if it happens for you, it's a painful experience, as we've said. It's not easy because you feel isolated. It's not talked about in evangelical circles, so therefore you feel, like I said, alone. And one of the things I'm hoping in time we can address is there's this powerful relationship in the evangelical community between faith and certainty. Mm-hmm. That in some ways there's a confusion between the two.
Right.
The people believe that if you have faith, then you are 100% certain. Mm-hmm. If you have faith, you have no doubt. If you have faith, you don't question. Mm-hmm. And so when you begin to question, whatever it might be, you immediately begin to think you're losing your faith. And that's really what it feels like.
Yeah, because that's the only kind of faith you had.
When I went back and I realized I wasn't really losing my faith at all.
Right.
It just felt like it. I was on a journey of faith.
Right.
And it took me through a variety of different kinds of experiences. But my whole life really, and maybe life itself, is a journey of faith for all humans. And unfortunately, we have tended to capture those words for ourselves when we're evangelicals. We don't want anyone else to have these words. We want, if you want to have a journey of faith, you've got to be a part of our group.
Yeah.
Nothing else qualifies as a legitimate journey of faith.
It's control groups. It's exclusionary groups.
Right. It's defined a certain way. It looks a certain way. It feels a certain way. And so therefore, those that don't quite represent that for a moment end up feeling lost.
And now that we're talking about this and why we called this podcast Deconstructors Club, is because we want people to understand there is a community of people that have gone through or going through what you're going through right now if you're deconstructing, and I was one like Bob, and it's interesting because I like what you just said. We're on a journey of faith.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like we're left the faith. We're
No.
actually exploring a different kind of faith, if you want to put it that way. But that's not a faith that imposes you to become somebody that you've never, ever were created to be.
Yeah.
And that has a lot to do with all our LGBTQIA friends
Mm-hmm.
that basically, especially within that context of evangelicalism, have been told to deny their identity,
Mm-hmm.
have been told to deny who they really are
Mm-hmm.
because it's sinful and it's wrong and because of that, many people are deconstructing and leaving. But there is a place where you can have your identity and your faith.
Mm-hmm.
And even more so because your faith is what affirms that identity.
Right. Yeah, and so many people don't think there's anything else out there. They've been so manipulated.
Mhm.
I'm just going to use the word in such a toxic way that they've been made to believe that if they move in another direction, that somehow they move there without God.
Right.
And I
Right.
think that's such a shame.
Yet it's the complete opposite.
Complete opposite.
It's
That-
actually God that's leading them to be.
And-
God wants you to be everything He's created you to be.
And it would be very it would be very suspect for evangelicals, leadership within evangelicalism, to respect that those who are following God may be following God away from their community.
Right.
They may be following God that will lead them somewhere other than that community. And very few evangelical leaders are able to acknowledge that.
Mhm.
And that's partly because of the way the system operates. It operates that it's us against them.
Right.
And that system is very important. That's why in evangelicalism, I can remember almost every sermon I heard while I was in an evangelical church was us against them.
Yeah, it needs an enemy.
It needs
needs
the
somebody
world.
to- yep.
It's the evil world that
Mhm.
I'm fighting. And if you can come join us, we will stand against the world together.
Right.
And so that kind of setup makes it very difficult
Mhm.
for people who are trying to be honest about how they feel. Very difficult for them to follow the path, even though they're uncertain about that path, even though they don't know really
Mhm.
where they're going exactly, but to follow the path as they perceive it, as they move toward it,
Mhm.
and not to feel shamed as they
Right.
go.
Right.
And that's tough. It's hard.
And that was one of the things, like for me in deconstructing, we both, I've been a pastor for 30 years, and most of those years were within the context of evangelicalism. And, even the things that I believed in, the things that I preached and taught, it's difficult because you come out of that when you come to realize even the damage that you did yourself in what you taught. That's one of the reasons why I completely left that context, completely left evangelicalism. And one of the things that I continually would question, though, and this is what led me to leave, was the ethic of Christ compared to what we were being told was ethical and moral. It didn't align because of the social issues
Right.
that were going on. And within evangelicalism, the teachings were not that way. It was more geared toward bigotry. It was more geared toward exclusion. It was more geared toward racism. It was more geared toward, punishment, judgment, marginalizing people. And, you're not, when you're talking about social issues of immigration, when you're talking about social issues of LGBTQIA, incarceration, all of these issues that are real issues that are going on in our world, in our nation, our society, and the church not addressing those issues at all. On the contrary, being on the wrong side of those issues. Yeah. And so it's interesting because one time I was a part of, we were doing theology pubs with another group, and we had titled our gathering that day, "Are people leaving the church for moral or immoral reasons?" And the conclusion of it all is like most of the people that leave are leaving actually for moral reasons, because sadly, the evangelical church has been more immoral than what they even think they are. That's what they are. Standing on the wrong side. And for them, immorality has everything to do with sexuality and sex and everything. But yeah, there's so much more that basically they've stood on when it comes to the immoral side of things. And those are the things, those reasons why, we're seeking to deconstruct, because it's like, I don't want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a part of, we're talking about elections for next year. I don't want to be a part of fascism and Christian nationalism and all of these things that are not the ethic of Christ.
Right.
And definitely we'll talk about all those things.
Well, the only ethic that I remember talked about in my evangelical church was sex. It was, evangelicals are so obsessed about sex. And it was the only sin anybody had to worry about. Everything else was like, well, no big deal. And the problem was there was a lot of difficulty, sexual issues and problems within evangelicalism that were kept quiet because it wasn't acceptable. So evangelicals think that if they speak loudly about sex, people will make better sexual choices, and that just wasn't the case, because that's intellectual, and sexuality is part of our emotional inner world and inner life, and it doesn't work to just pound on it from the outside.
Right.
You have to give people a fuller sense of what it means to be a sexual being and how to make choices that are constructive and beneficial for your life and for the lives of others.
And just a lot of that teaching of purity culture and which we definitely will touch on a lot of these things when it comes to episodes. But you know what? We're about to close this first episode. It's short, but it's on purpose because it's our introductory episode for our new podcast called Deconstructors Club.
Yes. And one last thing. If you tune into this, if people tune into this, they will not get pat answers. They will not get just simplified platitudes.
Right. That's good.
They're going to be listened to. We're going to explore and discover, because I believe that reconstruction and deconstruction and reconstruction go on throughout your lifetime. There's always more to learn, another way to see it, another way to look at it. I hope people will become participants with us in the journey.
Right. And you'll be able to, all those that are listening to us, we're going to be launching this podcast on different platforms where you'll be able to interact and comment and so forth. So remember, it is a Deconstructors Club. We're not really excluding people, but if someone's harmful, we're going to do our job to, moderate as best as we can to keep it a safe space. But we're going to close it out right now, but we are really, really just excited about this journey. Yeah, and, Bob and I, we have another episode where we introduce ourselves a little bit more to you all. We're able to give you a background of where we come from, how we were a part of evangelicalism, and all of that. We're definitely going to give you a lot of that background so that you all can get to know us better. But we already, there's a lineup that we have. There's just great episodes coming up.
Come join us. We're excited about this journey. We want you to be a part of it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you, Bob. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in, hearing us, watching us. How Bob was saying, and we're talking about, this is an exciting time for us. This is an exciting podcast, and hopefully in the future, as we go into our different episodes, we're making that change, that impact, and you are totally welcome to become a part of the Deconstructors Club.
Yeah.
There isn't
no fee.
No fee. No fee on
to
this
sign anything up. No. No cards.
No initiations.
No. You just decide you want to be in the club and you're in. That's it.
That's it. We decided that even before we knew there was anything like this.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, till next time, everybody, we're so excited to launch this Deconstructors Club. Take care, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. If you have questions, a comment, or just need more information, make sure to follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Just search for Deconstructors Club Podcast. Also, you can watch these episodes on YouTube by subscribing to our Deconstructors Club Podcast page. Remember, you're not alone in this journey.